Hey everybody, this is Matthew at Earthworks here in Northeast Florida in Jacksonville. Today we're going to be talking about camellias. We have a garden club that is visiting, and I'm going to do a short presentation on camellias, their history, their uses, and a little bit of question and answer. Stay tuned, and I hope you enjoy. Our environment. You all have been gardening here for a long enough period of time to know that we're not quite temperate, like we would be just a few hundred miles north of here, and we're not quite tropical, which would be just a few hundred miles south of here. We're in what I call purgatory. We're somewhere in the middle. So, no, really, it is kind of like gardening hell here in a lot of ways. We're right on the border. So if you've lived in other parts of the country, it's a lot easier to kind of plan your gardening calendar. Here, it's kind of a roller coaster ride, and the plants feel it as well. So we're bringing in all these plants that are somewhat temperate. We're also bringing plants that are somewhat tropical and some that are truly tropical, and we're trying to grow them in this land of purgatory. And then we also have giant or marbles of sand that we try and grow our plants into, which is not really soil at all. So we have a lot of things up against us, right? So the camellias we can grow here, and we can grow them successfully because we've seen it happen, but we do need to at least set them up for success, okay? So getting them in the right spot is important. Can we put them in the blazing hot middle of the yard? Probably not. They're not going to last as long. They may live there, but they're probably not going to thrive there. They're always going to be stressed. They're going to attract insects. They're going to get diseases, so on and so forth. So not all of us have the ideal location, which would be a filtered light throughout the day. A morning sun as opposed to the afternoon sun would be ideal. And even into some pretty shady conditions, I've seen camellias thriving. Now, you wouldn't want to put them into really heavy shade, and it'd also be the wettest spot in the yard, okay? Because they don't like to have wet feet either, okay? So that's another problem we have with camellias in a lot of our plants like gardenias and hydrangeas that can live here, but if their feet stay wet, if their roots stay wet for too long, they start having problems, okay? So we have to make sure that where they go, they get really good drainage, not stay too wet, but not dry out for long periods of time, because they don't like extreme drought either. They like it somewhere right in the middle. So they don't like the extremes that we have. And as you all know, we do experience extremes here. So over the last, I think, 30 to 45 days, I think we measured almost a foot of rain. A foot of rain. And I think for the year, we're close to 4 feet this year. 4 feet of rain. Okay, if you think about some parts of the world, don't even get this, right? You know, you think about California and the West Coast, which prays for rain, and we get 4 feet. It's really amazing how much rain we get here, and a lot of plants is too much. So what do we see? We see fungus, we see molds, we see mildews, and these are all things that really can keep a plant from thriving, all right? So with the camellia, well-drained soil is important. The other important thing about the soil is that we keep it on the acidic side on the pH, okay? So there are a few products I just brought here to show you. There are other brands. Brand is not important necessarily. So the organic version would be the Hollytone, which helps acidify the soil. Another organic way of acidifying your soil would be through pine straw or pine bark. When it breaks down in compost, it helps amend the soil, which is really good. It helps build up the soil and puts organic matter in there, which is great for our plants. But also it has a bit of acid, so it helps acidify our soil. And most of us here in Jacksonville have more of a neutral or leaning toward alkaline soil. And when we talk about pH, it's overlooked a lot, but it's actually a really important factor of taking a plant from living here to thriving here, okay? So the pH would be like if we were living in our atmosphere, but we had a little bit less oxygen and a little bit more hydrogen, or a little bit more methane, or a little bit more anything, okay? We would still live here, but if we didn't have the optimum oxygen, we'd be more lethargic, tired, more prone to get sick, okay? We wouldn't have a circulatory system that was functioning properly. So in the root system of the plant, if the pH is off, it's like their atmosphere, okay? That's their atmosphere. Now they do also need the upper atmosphere with oxygen as well, but they also need a pH balance that allows them to do what they need to do. So if the pH is off, it actually locks up and binds certain nutrients, and they can't absorb them. Literally can't. So it's like that's a slow death, a slow starvation of not being able to extract the nutrients they need from the soil. So that's why pH balance for the plant is important. So know that generally speaking, we're on the alkaline side. Most plants, like up in the 90 percentile, lean toward middle, okay, neutral toward acid, and that's for most of the plants that we grow here. So if you haven't done a pH test, I would recommend it. You can take soil samples and send them off to the extension agency here in town. There are pH meters, a little electronic box with a little metal rod. stick in the soil, and it'll give you a pH reading. Do not buy the little capsules that you mix with water and you shake up and you have to match the colors. I tried that for a long time and it's literally murky at best. But a pH meter is important. So a lot of times we scratch our head and wondering why our plants are struggling. We could be doing everything else right and maybe the pH is off. And we would never know because there's no easy, simple way other than getting a device or sending off a sample and knowing. But once you know what your soil is like, then you can make the adjustments with different types of amendments. It's very likely too that you could have very acidic soil. So depending on which side of town you're on, depending on, like in your neighborhood you have a lot of the oaks, okay? So the oak trees actually help acidify the soil. So if you have those old oaks and you have gardening areas under the oaks, they may be leaning neutral or toward acid, but the other areas where there aren't oaks may be neutral to alkaline, okay? So you could have different sections in your yard, literally just feet away, that could be completely different. So, but if you are having those moments when you have plants struggling, that could be a factor that's not easily recognized.
Is it good to add your coffee grinds?
She's asking, is it good to add coffee grinds? Coffee grinds are good for all plants. Yes, they are. And they are slightly on the acid side, but they also add nitrogen to the soil. Yeah, they are. So coffee grounds are great. So if you are a coffee drinker, sprinkling them in your beds around your plants, they will break down and feed your plants and slightly acidify the soil. So one less thing you put in the trash, yeah. Yes, and they are a natural, a mild but natural insect deterrent as well. Yeah, they sure are. So there are a lot of benefits to coffee, for sure. Yeah. What was that? Eggshells are good. The only downside to eggshells is they take a really long time to break down. Like it could take years. If you were to pulverize them in the blender or food processor or something like that, that would speed it up. For sure. Yeah, but all those things are compost ingredients, and they are. So all food scraps, all those things. You know, it's hard in some neighborhoods to compost properly because to do it optimally, it takes a little bit of space to do. So the ideal space to do compost, like premium compost in the shortest amount of time, would be 3 3x3 areas. Yeah, so it's just, and not all of us can do that, right? So, and it's just hard because of restrictions and lots of different things that modern neighborhoods have. So it's just the way it is. However, you can purchase compost, thank God, right? So garden centers like us actually sell compost. And so if you want to get compost into the garden, if your plants had mouths, they would be screaming thank you because they love compost. Compost is the natural food. And so in most of my talks, I do eventually get to this point, but if you think about the forest as our model, so if you've heard me talk before, I use this analogy a lot. The forest is our model for the garden. The forest takes care of itself. You walk through a beautiful garden in the forest, you walk through a botanical garden where things are happening naturally. It's set up so that the plants drop leaves, drop branches, drop squirrels, they compost, they feed the roots, and then it just is a continuous cycle. It just feeds itself, self-perpetuating. But our gardens, we take everything out of it, right? So it's a little different. So the more input we put in the organic realm, more natural items that break down slowly, they decompose, they turn to compost, the happier our plants will be. So, you know, we can use synthetics and they work, but the synthetics don't add anything. They move through the soil quickly, they give them a quick burst, and then they're gone. Whereas the organic matter stays in the soil for a longer period of time and turns our naturally sandy soil into something that looks more like earth rather than sand. So the sand is really, if you blow it up, it's glass, and it's like trying to garden in a colander full of marbles. It's literally, that's the best analogy I can come up with, because everything you pour into it is going to go right through. Now if you start breaking up leaves, mixing that in with the marbles, you pour the water through, a little bit less will go through, take some bark, crunch it up, put it in there, a little bit less water will go through, nutrients, so on and so forth. So that's the idea, is trying to build our soil. So using the pine bark and pine straw is the easiest way. You leave it in each year, you don't have to pull it out, you just put fresh on top, and that'll layer it, so it's like composting, and what's underneath will break down, and like the heavy stuff in the box of cereal, it'll start working its way into the soil and making our soil more rich. The pine, what they call the cypress mulch, is wood, but it's very heavy, it's hard, it gets compacted, and it takes a long time to break down. Most of us don't pull it out as often as we need. It gets compacted, it smothers the airflow to the roots, and our plants always look kind of meh, you know, not like they're really thriving, because we're literally choking them slowly. It's like having a little tiny straw, and just that's all we're able to breathe through, and it's really hard for our plants to get the air circulation at the roots when the mulch is too thick. And so pulling out the cypress is very important, but the pine straw and the pine bark is very light. It doesn't compact and get real dense like the cypress stuff does, and people who garden with it have less problems long term, less recurring problems. Peat is good, yeah. Peat is a great soil amendment. So when there are times when it's convenient to pull the mulch back, okay, do an annual or a biannual or whatever, you pull the mulch back, you sprinkle down some peat, put the mulch back on top, that'd be fantastic. Yeah, anything dark, rich, natural that breaks down slowly is great to amend our soil. And really, any little thing like that you can do over time accumulates, and you don't have to do it like every quarter, but at least an annual, biannual, you're adding organic matter, and it's true for your lawns as well. Actually, a lot of golf courses are moving a little further away from using synthetics and chemicals and beginning to layer compost into the golf courses because they're finding that they have to use less of the chemicals, which cost a lot. So they do it less often, and they find that they have really good results. And there's also living things in the natural products. So what we found out is that there's a lot of living organisms in natural products, a lot of microbiology, bacteria. So we all have some understanding of how we have gut bacteria that's really good for us. Well, in the gardening world, in the organic material, there's a lot of beneficial bacteria that actually have relationships with plants and help the plants grow. And so we're finding that a combination of using some synthetics and organics are working really well together.
Prune them if you want to.
Correct, pruning them. Okay, so some of us were talking early. I've had a lot of customers over time ask me why their camellias aren't blooming this year, and by the end of the conversation we usually figure out that someone pruned them too late in the season. That's one reason. So if you have someone else pruning your shrubs and you have camellias in the garden, that would be one shrub I'd probably tell them to lay off of. Especially after July, beginning of August, you don't want to do a lot of pruning to them because they're going to be beginning to form their buds. And if they get scalped, trimmed, shaped, past that, you may not have the flowering which you expect. And the whole reason why you have a camellia is for the flowers, not necessarily the leaves, unless you're growing the tea variety, the sinensis. So yes, keeping them well fed with an acidic type fertilizer, so you can get acidic fertilizers in a liquid form, so you can get these soil acidifiers in a liquid, you can get soil acidifiers in a granular. We've got a slow release. This is immediately available to the plant. You can give them boosts of soil acidifier to keep the pH where they want it. But pruning them too late in the season is the number one reason. Sometimes there are pests. So someone else had mentioned that there are certain types of scale insects that like to attack the plants, and especially around the buds. So as the buds are forming, when they're young especially, they're very soft, okay, and they're very tender, but they're also very sweet to the insects. And so the sap-sucking insects will gather around the base of the bud and start sucking all the juice out. And then right around where they connect to the branch, they'll begin to wither and they'll fall off, okay? So if you see buds on the ground, it could be that. I've also heard squirrels like to eat at the buds, unfortunately, and also we don't like to talk about, okay, so we already know that squirrels are rodents, but we do live in Florida, and when we're not looking, trust me, there are lots of rodents here, okay? So rats, mice, squirrels are all kind of the same. They do like to nibble on the buds. So if they find them, or if they're pressured, I know, if they're pressured. So every time you see a snake, thank the snake.
Thank the snake.
Because they eat the mice, right? I know. But without the snakes, we would have a lot more of the other ones.
Is there a special way to prune?
Is there a special?
Like does the blossom come on the branch every other year or every year?
No, it comes on the new growth. Okay, so you see it on the tip, right?
I've touched my camellias 0.
Yeah.
And I must have 500 buds on one tree.
That's amazing. You're right.
I mean, I've done nothing.
Right. Right.
Nothing.
You don't. Okay. So when she was asking about pruning, it's not that the pruning is necessary, but if you are going to prune for shaping, let's say you have a wild hair. You know, sometimes you just get this branch that's like 6 feet long. But if you want to cut it off or it's blocking something, yeah, you cut it back. Now, is there a special place? So generally, we prune between what's called the nodes. So the nodes are where each new leaflet is, okay? So we prune right in between them, okay? Now, if I were to prune here, you see these two leaves here, they could potentially be new branches. So if I wanted it to thicken up here and branch, I would intentionally cut it here to promote 2 new branches there. If I needed it to thicken up here, I would cut it right here and allow these 2 leaves to turn into branches, okay? So the branches, I mean, these leaves eventually will or can form branches, but you can force it to form branches by cutting it. Okay, so in nature, the tree, the shrub will do its branching in its own time. But we know the art of bonsai, is all about forcing plants to do things that we want them to do. And we force them to branch in directions and in ways that they wouldn't do naturally, or wouldn't do in a period of time in which we would find it suitable. So we prune things to encourage branching in very specific places.
Do they become minor trees?
Well, there are 20,000 varieties.
But
Okay.
do they just, I guess, my question really is, do I need to start pruning? I mean, they're so gorgeous, I don't touch them, I don't want
You don't need to. You don't need to do anything.
No, but I'm afraid
You don't
that
need.
if I don't do
If it's not,
something,
if your tree is thriving, you don't have to do anything, right? Okay.
it likes the court.
You are fortunate, yes, and
Yeah,
you found the right spot. Okay, so that's the other thing is if you get a plant into the right spot, it becomes very carefree over time. The longer it's in the ground, the stronger the root system. I would do nothing in your case, right? Don't fiddle with it.
Probably 5 feet.
Yeah.
I've
Okay,
tried 2 of them.
so there are some camellias, since there are so many varieties, there are some that are ground covers. There's a lady in Jack's Golf, one of our clients, and I went out to her house and she had these scrambling plants with these big thick buds look like a camellia. It's like, what is that? She's like, it's a camellia. I think she went up to North Carolina, she visited a garden center up there. North Carolina is the mecca regionally for camellia growers. But there are scrambling ones that are low growing. There are ones that grow into trees, and then everything in between. There are fragrant, believe it or not, fragrant varieties. We actually had, I don't know if we have any left now. I'm going to show you where our camellias are. They are actually up against that back fence. We have probably 30 or 40 different varieties of camellias over there right now. But there are some that are fragrant as well, which is not common, but there are a few. And the colors are going to be generally reds, all shades of pink, whites, and there are some that are kind of like pale yellows even, creamy yellows, and even some that are a little bit darker yellow. And those come from a very specific type of camellia that we don't find that species here, but we find its genetics because it's been hybridized with sasanquas and japonicas, and you get that yellow. So what they'll do is they'll take like a white japonica, for example, and cross it with this species of yellow-ish genetics to get a white kind of to start looking more yellow when they hybridize it. So, and then you're going to find bicolors, which means flowers with multiple colors on it. So red and white, pink and white, pink and red, and so forth. Red with a yellow center, pink with a yellow center, white with a yellow center, and you'll start to see some of that. And then you'll see lots of different flower forms as well. And so the Japanese really began cultivating them early. So we had the Chinese who were really focused on the tea. The Japanese got into cultivating more of the flowers. And an interesting thing is that although they can be great cut flowers, traditionally the Japanese never use them as cut flowers because in their mythology and in their culture, when they first started doing this, they associated, so you know the blanket they make underneath them that's really beautiful of all the petals, if you've seen a big tree? Well, they associated those petals falling off with beheadings. And so they never wanted to bring it into the house and bring that kind of like bad luck or whatever into the house, so they never used camellias for cuttings because they associated those falling petals. Apparently there were a lot of beheadings in those days, okay? So
How long would a camellia last? I don't even cut them.
how long would the flower last?
Yeah, exactly.
I'm not sure. But what I would do is I would float it in a bowl of water so that that little cutting, it could absorb moisture and it would hold that petal. You could do this with magnolia blossoms. So if you can get a low-hanging magnolia flower, bring that in the house and float it in a little bowl of water. It smells amazing. And they'll last a lot longer. But then, you know, because they have so many petals over time, then they begin to drop them all. But when you have a tree or one that's a little taller, we can see underneath it, that is part of the show, is all those petals underneath actually is really beautiful and complements what you see on the top, so it balances itself out, yeah.
Is there a variety that can be grown in pots?
Oh yes, they all can be grown in pots.
Oh, really?
Oh
I
yes, for certain. For certain. They're great for containers, yeah.
Okay.
They're great for containers, yeah. So growing them in a container you can do, but what you're going to want to do is prepare the container for maximum drainage. So no matter what container, I'd probably put some gravel in the bottom to ensure that the bottom doesn't get clogged and allow for free flow of water. The bigger the container, the more gravel.
It's time to plant them.
The best time to plant anything, including but not limited to camellias, is in the wintertime.
Is the winter.
If it's not a tropical plant or a cold sensitive plant, the best time to plant is in the winter. Hands down, yeah. because it's less stressful on the plant. Less likelihood of shock, less watering needs. Water's not cheap, and it's not going to get any cheaper. But we're still kind of mild enough too, to where we have these warm weeks, these warm days, where the roots can continue to grow. And if the roots can continue to grow while it's mild, their first summer is going to be much easier. So whether it's warm or whether it's a cold winter, the camellias are still going to do their thing, warm or cold. So you'll always have reliable color during the months when most everything else is going dormant or not blooming. So incorporating these, whether they're in containers, on the patio, the lanai, wherever, or near a seating area where we spend time outdoors when the weather's mild, camellias will give us color. So if you get a combination of japonica and sasanqua, you'll have from fall as early as November all the way through into late February, even into early March. Some of these will be blooming. Okay, so she sees a dark bud, okay, but a light flower. So all the buds are going to be dark when they're tight, okay? And that's true for a lot of plants, that the color is still concentrated in that bud. And then as they begin to unfurl, that color saturation goes throughout the petals, yeah. So sometimes it's hard to tell by the bud the exact tone that it's going to be when it's fully open. And then you'll also notice that when they first open, they can be darker, and then over time they lighten up a bit. Yeah. Yeah, a lot of flowers will do that.
Squirrels like to eat the buds.
Well,
and everything. Well, how do you keep a
squirrels
squirrel
squirrels don't always know that. You know, sometimes the squirrel has to discover they like them. So it's not saying that just because you have squirrels, you're not going to have flowers. It's not true, because we see flowers all over town. There just are some particular times that squirrels are interested for whatever reason.
Nothing to repel the squirrels like the
Well, do you have a Chihuahua? Thanks for staying tuned. I hope you enjoyed learning a little bit about camellias and how they're used here in Northeast Florida. If you all have any questions or any ideas for us, any future videos you can make, please comment and share in the comment section below. We're always looking for new ideas and would like to do videos that you all are interested in. So help us out, leave a comment, share, and give us some ideas for the next videos that are going to be up and coming. Until next time.